Shawnee, Jerry E. Clark. Talking about a Skippakittiki. So the Shawnees all over in Kentucky, right? Shawnee bands are in eastern Kentucky, northern Kentucky. They're just running all over the place. South, north, east, west. Shawnee is where Kentucky's name is a Shawnee name is Skippakittiki. It's a bastard form of a Skippakittiki. They also called it like Kentucky or Kentucky or something differently. So here is in 1752, a Virginia trader named John Finley was invited by the Shawnee to build a house at Skippakittiki, but he was forced to flee in 1753 when some French Indians attacked a group of Virginia traders at the village. French Indians. So he's saying some French Indians attacked him, and then John Finley had to run. Unless John Finley set the fucker on fire and torched it, unless John Finley's people had his friends like torch the fucking place. Virginia traders. The Virginia traders wanted that land. French Indians thought French were the good ones. The French were the ones that actually dealt with the Indians and traded with them. I don't know. That whole story just seems really weird. John Finley goes there in 1752, then all of a sudden it's gone. It says that it was abandoned in 1754 after the fall of Fort Necessity, and the inhabitants apparently joined the Shawnee in Ohio, though some may have joined the Cherokee in eastern Tennessee. Abandoned, and that was burned to the fucking ground is what happened. There may have also been a settlement in eastern Kentucky in the period after the French and Indian War. Gilson places a Shawnee village at the confluence of Big Mud Lick and Little Mud Lick creeks in northern Johnson County from 1764 to 1774. So in Johnson County, you all had some Indians in Johnson County. This is the village which Jenny Wiley is supposed to have made her escape. Jenny Wiley was kidnapped by, I guess, I don't know, I want to say the Shawnee, but she was kidnapped and then she ran away, right? One of the two first women into Kentucky, both of them were kidnapped in. The Indians just loved our women. There are other references to the Shawnee in the vicinity of Big Sandy River as well. One of the most interesting accounts is to the tradition of John Swift, who is said to have discovered and worked silver mines with the Shawnee laborers in eastern Kentucky from 1760 to 1770. This tradition persisted among the Shawnee as late as 1870 when a descendant of Cornstalk returned to Mud Lick Creek in Johnson County in search of silver. Finley, I feel like John Finley was kind of a counterfeiting piece of shit bastard. John Swift, okay. John Finley was a counterfeiter. So he was a shiesty motherfucker. 1752, John Finley goes to a Skippakittiki, and all of a sudden Skippakittiki is no more. John Finley had something to do with that. Something real screwed up with that. What the fuck is up with John Finley? John Finley's the one that tells Daniel Boone about the beauty of Kentucky, too, and makes him, all excited about coming here. So, it's not certain whether many of the settlements in eastern Kentucky were permanent, whether they were merely seasonal hunting or warring encampments. The Big Sandy was traveled by both the Catawba and the Shawnee when they made war on each other during the Revolution, and later the Shawnee established camps in eastern Kentucky and Tennessee from which they raided American settlers. So during the Revolution, they set up camp, they pick up camp, they go elsewhere, they set up here, they go there. Kentucky is Indian land, all right? Kentucky, Skippakittiki, Kentucky. So that's about a Skippakittiki in Clark County, at least out of this book. Job Spencer said, of all the Indian language I ever heard, that of the Shawnees is the most expressive, stately, eloquent, and beautiful. They have a folklore of beauty and value. The retention of their language and folklore is remarkable considering their dispersed locations and contacts with other languages and cultures. Even after extensive contact with the Creek Indians in Alabama, the Shawnee, unlike other tribes associated with the Creek Confederacy, retain their own language and customs. So they're pretty conservative with their customs. Peter Chartier continued to serve as a trader and had a post on the Allegheny River from 1735 to 1745, but after plundering some Pennsylvania traders of their furs, so Peter Chartier stole some Pennsylvania traders. That's interesting. Pennsylvania traders and Virginia traders they were attacked by. I don't know. He fled his village and joined another group of Shawnee on the Scioto River in Ohio. From there, he may have moved to Skippakitaki in Clark County. He is said to have stayed 2 years there before he moved again to Alabama. So Peter Chartier possibly could have been living in either. He definitely lived in Kentucky, but it was either a Skippakitaki or Lower Shawnee town. In 1755, he was on the Tennessee River, but trouble with the Chickasaw drove him back to the Ohio at the present site of Shawneetown, Illinois. Nothing more is recorded of his whereabouts, and perhaps he died there. Some of the Shawnee situated there eventually returned to Ohio. Others moved to Missouri, but no mention is made of Chartier. It is not known if he married or had any children, but it was ties such as those he and his father established to the Shawnee that gave the French an advantage on the Indian trade. French officials, as opposed to French traders, displayed power, which, though sometimes abused, was designed to garner respect. When diplomacy failed, the French often resorted to force. Behind all this was a strong centralization of control and demand for allegiance to the crown. French policy, though cumbersome at times, was consistent and coordinated. In spite of the abuses, the Indian trade expanded, but rice was becoming a profitable crop, and farmers who had no interest in the fur trade began to push inland. With this, political relations between the Shawnee and the colonists deteriorated, and by 1715, the Shawnee, remaining in South Carolina, joined in an open revolt against the British colony, a conflict known as the Yamasee War. The Yamasee War. So the Shawnee was involved in the Yamasee War. What the French could not gain through competition and presence, they managed to achieve by threat and force. To keep the Shawnee from trading with the British, the French threatened them with retaliation if they continued to deal with Pennsylvania traders. Without protection, the Shawnee were no longer able to retain their position of non-involvement, and for the first time openly sided with the French against the British. From 1754 to 1763, the Shawnee made raid after raid on the British frontier settlements, particularly in western Virginia and Kentucky. So 1754 is when the beginning of the 60 Years' War began. So that's when Skippakitaki is no more. It's the same time that the 60-year Indian Wars, 60 Years' Wars started, the American Indian Wars, the 60-year American Indian Wars. 1754 to 63 is when they made raid after raid into the British frontier settlements, particularly West Virginia. So to be in West Virginia, you're right next to, Kentucky, Eastern Kentucky, and West Virginia, right? So, in Western Virginia. So you would be in West Virginia, in the western part of Virginia. So how would they be there? How could you make raids and attacks there if you didn't live there? If you didn't live around there? The Shawnee own Kentucky, okay? This is Kentucky, a Shawnee homeland. Some Cherokee too, but definitely Shawnee. On the Virginia side, Colonels George Washington and William Preston were leading proponents of the land claims of the French and Indian War veterans, and they, with Dr. Thomas Walker, pushed for settlement of the Ohio Valley. George Washington is just eager to settle new lands, the supposed father of our country. He also has his own personal Indian wars when he becomes president. Sending Hosea Harmar, Harhar or Marhar or some shit, St. Clair. You had St. Clair, Pierre St. Clair's defeat or some shit. George Washington, he was an Indian killer. Actually, he was known as an Indian burner, an Indian village burner, some shit. So in direct violation of instructions from the Crown, surveyors and speculators from Virginia, including William Crawford, Thomas Bullitt, and James Harrod, were working in Kentucky from 1772 to 74. Support forces accompanied these surveyors began to attack Shawnee hunting parties, and Lord Dunmore, governor of Virginia, authorized sending militia to protect the Virginians. All-out war resulted. This conflict, known as Lord Dunmore's War, involved nearly all the Shawnee in the Ohio Valley and was one of the bloodiest wars in Shawnee history. Pennsylvania traders protested that the Virginians were trying to destroy the trade. The Virginians countered with charges that Pennsylvania traders were buying goods stolen from the whites and encouraging the Shawnee to repel or kill the Virginia settlers. The war was really a territorial dispute between Pennsylvanians and Virginians, with the Shawnee serving as pawns in the middle of the struggle. The fact that settlement west of the mountains was prohibited by the proclamation of 1763 was academic. By the time troops were sent, The war began in July of 1774 when one party of volunteers was ambushed by a group of Shawnee warriors, and the struggle escalated rapidly as Governor Dunmore sent 1,500 militia from western Virginia under the command of Colonel Andrew Lewis. On October 6th, the militia met a large force of Shawnee under the leadership of Chief Cornstalk at Point Pleasant, where the great Kanawha River joins the Ohio. Heavy losses were experienced on both sides, but Cornstalk finally gave up and accepted defeat. In the Treaty of Camp Charlotte that followed, the Shawnee were forced to give up all the rights to land south of the Ohio River. For the Shawnee, the Revolution was an extension of Lord Dunmore's war. Many of the revolutionaries were the same people against whom the Shawnee had fought in 1774. There's some indication that the Shawnee were at first divided over renewing the fight with these adversaries, but the murder of Chief Cornstalk in 1777 angered the Shawnee, who originally had not joined the alliance, and now they took up arms. Cornstalk, also known as Hokolesqua, was a hereditary chief of the Chillicothe division of the Shawnee, and thus he was nominally the chief of the entire Shawnee tribe. He did not particularly favor an all-out war with the whites again, but neither did he want to lose land in Kentucky to settlers. He emerged as a powerful and skillful war leader during skirmishes with the Virginians, as the latter illegally claimed and settled land west of the Alleghenies. But Cornstalk was, like all Shawnee leaders, a capable orator as well. He knew the treaties and spoke from a position of what he perceived to be right and what he knew to be just. His speech at the Treaty of Charlotte struck out eloquently at the numerous wrongs suffered by the Shawnee at the hands of the Virginians and other European colonists. In spite of his ability as a warrior, he did not want to put his people in a position he knew would only speed their doom. He was the whites' only hope for a peaceful relationship with the Shawnee on the frontier. After the Treaty of Charlotte, he did his best to keep his people from joining in an alliance against the settlers in western Virginia. But in a peace mission to the fort at Point Pleasant to warn the whites of conditions on the frontier, he was detained along with his son, Elin Nipsico, and Sub-Chief Red Hawk. So you had Cornstalk, Elin Nipsico, and Red Hawk. All three people was at Point Pleasant. Okay, West Virginia? So Red Hawk is going to hex you, and Elin Nipsico is going to hex you. That's Cornstalk and his son. Cornstalk is hexing you, Red Hawk is hexing you, and Elin Nipsico is hexing you all. The ghost of those Indians will stay in West Virginia forever. So yeah. During the detention, 2 soldiers sent outside the fort to collect firewood were fired upon, and one of them was killed. So since they were killed by the Indians in the bushes, in retaliation, some of the soldiers killed the 3 captives. Despite the insistence of Patrick Henry, governor of Virginia, that the murderers be brought to justice, they were not, and the militia became involved in full-scale warfare with the Shawnee once again. Even as the revolution was being fought, speculators and settlers were pushing into what is now Kentucky. They were less concerned with the war than with acquiring land. Their new settlements were constantly threatened by attacks from the Shawnee, who still claimed Kentucky as their territory, their homeland, their home, because these attacks had a pronounced hatred of the Shawnee developed among the settlers. Because of these attacks, a pronounced hatred of the Shawnee developed among the Kentucky settlers, and the war between the Kentucky militia and the Shawnee continued long after the close of the Revolution. The Indian-hating frontiersmen hated Indian rights. Depredations against the Shawnee were numerous and cruel between 1779 and 1790. The Shawnee village of Chillicothe on the Little Miami River was attacked 5 times and completely destroyed on 4 of those occasions. Shawnee victims were often scalped by American soldiers. Prisoners were subjected to torture and even burned at the stake. The British were also involved in perpetuating these wars. They warned the Shawnee that to make peace with the U.S. would mean starvation, poverty, and removal from their land. The British offered bounties for settlers' scalps. One captive of the Shawnee observed warriors making scalps from the humps of buffalo and surmised that these would be sold as human scalps to the British. As the flood of settlers and troops into the Ohio Valley continued, it became increasingly difficult and costly for the Shawnee to resist the advance. The British, who had encouraged resistance, refused direct help. The final blow for the Shawnee came in 1794 when American troops, led by General Anthony Wayne, defeated the Shawnee at Fallen Timbers, Ohio. Fallen Timbers was in Ohio. That's where they lost. That's where the white people finally killed and destroyed the spirit of the Shawnee. A few Shawnee later joined with the Tecumseh, not Blackhoof, and continued to resist until the War of 1812, but most of them reluctantly agreed to the Greenville Treaty of 1795 and ceded all their land south of the Ohio River together with most of the present-day Ohio and southern Indiana to the United States of America.